One, vaping's dangerous. It has a lot of short-term and long-term complications. Two, it's really difficult for patients and parents particularly, and even teachers, to really understand whether someone's vaping. Some of the devices that people are using really hide it, so have a heightened awareness. And three, and most importantly, talk to your children about the dangers of vaping before they get engaged. If you're suspicious, have a conversation with them about that and what their friends might be doing, because there's an opportunity to intervene.
Vaping.
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 Vaping. Nobody knows too much about it.
Basically, they're a device that uses a battery to heat up a metal coil to 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 degrees Celsius in seconds in order to convert a liquid into tiny airborne droplets or an aerosol. And most of the liquids contain nicotine. Some of them contain THC or other cannabis or marijuana products, but we're not talking about those. I'm just talking about the nicotine vapes and nicotine e-cigarettes for the purpose of this video. The first e-cigarettes looked very much like normal cigarettes. They were designed by a pharmacist who was addicted to smoking and wanted a way to still get that nicotine hit, but to try and get himself off smoking and hopefully others too. So great starting intentions. Fast forward to today, and as I said, there's hundreds of different designs, many of which are more modern and sleek and colourful, and 23% of adults who use e-cigarettes never smoked in the first place. They just took up e-cigarettes and vaping. So is it good for you, or are they not so good for you? Let's take a look at the first thing that hits the news a lot, which is exploding e-cigarettes.
An e-cigarette exploded inside a New York City man's pocket.
He was smoking an electronic cigarette. It exploded in his face.
It's the latest e-cigarette to explode in a long list of similar cases across the country.
Do you remember when the Samsung phone batteries were exploding? In those cases, 26 people got injured, and then the phones were recalled, taken off the market, millions of them, so that no one else got hurt. In this case, we have 3,369 injuries from e-cigarettes exploding. A third of the cases of hospitalisation, the people were using the e-cigarette when it exploded, and then of course they're getting burns and injuries to their face and to their hands. Because of the design of the e-cigarette, when the batteries are exploding, it's forcing the top of the e-cigarette off into their face like a projectile. So if you look at this CT scan of a 17-year-old, you can see his jaw is shattered and his teeth are knocked in. These are not minor injuries. These are major, unpleasant. Nobody would wish that on anyone. So why are they exploding? Well, I've seen quite a few people say that it is because people are carrying spare batteries in their pocket.
They have a wrap on the outside that needs to stay intact. If that battery gets torn and that starts to touch metal or something like loose change in your pocket or something like that, it can definitely short out the battery.
In a world where YouTube exists, if you tell people lithium-ion batteries are going to explode if you short circuit them, there's going to be YouTubers who try and short circuit them and get them to explode. Now, this is an extremely dangerous thing to do, and I do not at all suggest that you try it. But when they did try it, this is what happened.
Immediately dropped the battery into the acrylic pipe. And guess what happened after 20 minutes? Nothing. Well, it got pretty hot, but nothing more happened.
And those results seemed consistent over all the channels that I watched of people trying to short circuit the batteries. They got hot, but they didn't get hot enough for them to explode. So in order to try and make them get those fireworks, what was required to do that? Well, on those dangerous YouTube videos, anything that basically pierced through the battery, making the layers that are wrapped up inside the battery come in contact with each other. So you're basically breaking the separation plates so that the layers come in contact with each other, and then you're getting the explosion. Now, I'm pretty sure that that's not happening in people's pockets. So why would they be exploding? One of the explanations is possibly faulty lithium-ion batteries, so people getting cheap, substandard batteries that actually have a fault inside them already, and then that just causes that separation layer that's inside the battery to break down, and boom, you have an explosion. But then there's other ones as well where it seems to be the fault of the device. This vaping channel says
it's not the mod's fault. It is definitely the user's fault whenever one of these things happens to explode.
So he's saying that by using mech mods and the wrong coil, people are essentially overstressing the battery and allowing it to overheat that way and then explode. My question to that would be, if mech mods are so dangerous that they can explode like this, surely there should be an awful lot of warnings that have to come with them in order for the people not to get sued. This law firm that is in fact representing different people who have been injured in explosions lists different devices that have been involved in explosions. Obviously this is not all devices because it's only just what one law firm is representing. Personally, I just wouldn't risk putting anything that could explode that close to my face. The next thing that hits the news a lot is EVALI.
EVALI, which stands for e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury.
We're seeing it progress pretty rapidly from no problems to severe lung injury and even death in just a week or so.
EVALI was very serious. It killed a lot of people, 68 people to be exact. It mainly occurred in the US back in 2019. If I show you the graph here, you can see that it really peaked and then it dropped right back down. And the reason it dropped back down is they started studying the lungs of people who came into the hospital with EVALI and found that the vast majority of them had not just been smoking the nicotine e-cigarettes, but they had been smoking the THC or the cannabinoid or the marijuana-based vapes basically, and they had been contaminated or deliberately added to the vitamin E acetate, which fine if you're going to eat that, not fine if you're going to inhale that. It basically is an extreme irritant to the lungs, causing them to swell, and that inflammation then meant that they basically couldn't breathe properly.
I'm the Vice Chair of the Department of Medicine at Christiana Care Hospital, and I'm also a pulmonary and critical care physician, so have been seeing patients that have had vaping-induced injury.
So before we get down to kind of the details of why vaping is in the news so often, why don't you explain what is vaping? A lot of people have no idea what this even is.
Right. So vaping is synonymous with the terms e-cigarette use or juuling. And what it is, it involves a mechanism or a delivery device that heats an oil or solvent into an aerosol form that then individuals can take and inhale through into their lungs.
So this isn't new, correct? Vaping's been around.
It's been around for several years.
That right now it's a hot topic for a multitude of reasons. The CDC has now activated Emergency Operations Center in order to try to tackle this issue. And in response to at least 6 deaths, 380 confirmed cases of lung illnesses associated with the use of e-cigarette products, Delaware Division of Public Health is now getting involved. Why is this so dangerous?
So vaping or e-cigarette use has been around for a while, as you mentioned, and initially thought to be a way to move patients from cigarette smoking to maybe a safer alternative. And in relatively rare circumstances, it may be a safer alternative than cigarette use. But in more recent instances, we've identified that vaping is associated with severe respiratory injury. There's some type of toxic components to what's in the vaping liquid or solvent that's causing direct injury to the lungs. It's causing patients to become extremely ill, some of which have required intensive care support, being put on a ventilator, and in some cases have passed away. But in addition to that, there are a whole host of chronic components in terms of dangers of vaping that have been known about or we're increasing to become aware about, and it's something that I think deserves a lot more attention as well.
Many people are wondering, it still can't be as bad as cigarette smoking, and especially the Juuls, they're all, it tastes like cherry, how can it be that bad? But just today, the American Heart Association of Delaware tweeted that 1 Juul pod is the equivalent of 20 cigarettes worth of nicotine. So obviously there is an issue here.
Yes, so nicotine is the most common component found in a lot of these vaping or e-cigarette components. And nicotine is a highly addictive substance, particularly in youth and young adult populations. It directly crosses into the brain. It can be highly addictive. It can lead to changes in development of the brain. It can lead to changes in coordination, concentration, performance at school. So it has a lot of negative consequences. But in addition to that, there are other substances that can be used in these vaping or e-cigarette type devices and include components like THC, which is the key ingredient in marijuana, as well as some other substances that can cause a lot of long-term consequences.
So as you mentioned, there's potentially marijuana in some of these products. Other than nicotine and potentially marijuana, what are we consuming?
So that's the other component that is not quite known, but a lot of times we're mixing these solvents with other things like that have hard metals and other toxic components, and in fact may be the components that lead to some of the cancer-inducing substances and also may be responsible for the spate of acute lung injury that we've been seeing as well.
I know we've referenced nicotine. Obviously nicotine is addictive. Is vaping as addictive?
So vaping, or the mechanism by which we get nicotine, can be just as addictive as you might administer it through cigarette smoking. And in some cases, the amount of nicotine that's put into these devices is much more than in cigarettes. And in other cases, it's an unregulated industry. So what's happening now is we're seeing sort of a street market that's developed by taking either used pods or buying unfilled pods and then filling them with a variety of substances that we don't really understand the concentrations of. And so all of those make the potential for addictive type personalities or disease much more concerning.
As I mentioned, the CDC is reporting hundreds of illnesses surrounding what they believe to be vaping and e-cigarette use. What is it really doing to your body?
So it's inducing some type of acute lung reaction, and we believe it's these toxic substances that are in this mix, in the solvent, that's going in and causing inflammation within the lungs, and that becomes fairly rampant. And so until we really pin down what the specific components of that are, I think there should be heightened awareness about the dangers of vaping in general. And certainly, if someone starts developing cough, irritation, symptoms with trouble breathing, and there's a concern that it may be related to vaping, they should seek at least advice from their physician and some medical attention. That will help us determine what type of connections there may be with certain types of vaping, but also may bring these patients to attention much faster. In the instances in which these patients have had really severe illness, it's happened fairly rapidly and often at a stage where what we could do was limited. But we are finding from some of these early cases that there are some interventions that we can employ that can limit the severity of the disease.
What do you say to patients who have children, who their teen is saying, you know, Mom, it tastes like cherry, it can't be that bad, just let it go, it's totally fine? What kind of conversation can parents have with their teens?
Well, that's one of the amazing and concerning components of the way that these devices have been marketed. So manufacturers such as Juul, which is the largest manufacturer of the vaping industry, create flavors like bubblegum and cherry and mango. So they seem really innocuous. And in some instances, I believe that people aren't even aware that nicotine is actually in here. But all of that to say that almost in every instance it either has nicotine, THC, or some other toxic substance. All of them are highly concerning in terms of its impact on the young adult's brain and what it can do to impact their performance at school, their interactions with you at home. It can exacerbate things like mental illness such as depression and anxiety. So it's very highly concerning in terms of a young adult and youth using these types of devices.
And what about secondhand vape? We know secondhand smoke is dangerous if someone smokes in your home, but say your 17-year-old is vaping, is your 13-year-old also at risk?
So certainly patients that might be at more risk are those who are prone to respiratory-related illness. Maybe someone who has chronic asthma might be more likely to have an asthma exacerbation. That's what some of the earlier information is determining. But certainly even in younger children, it can lead to cough and respiratory-related illness. So that's the most obvious dangers of secondhand vaping. What is not clear to us at this point, whether it might lead to higher incidences of cancer or addiction, we don't have enough information to really determine that at this time.
If there is one point that you want parents and teens who are watching this to really take home, what would that be?
One, vaping's dangerous. It has a lot of short-term and long-term complications. Two, it's really difficult for patients and parents particularly, and even teachers, to really understand whether someone's vaping. Some of the devices that people are using really hide it, so have a heightened awareness. And three, and most importantly, talk to your children about the dangers of vaping before they get engaged. If you're suspicious, have a conversation with them about that and what their friends might be doing, because there's an opportunity to intervene.
And if there is a parent who talks to their child and is now seeing some of the symptoms of the potential illness that this causes, what should they do?
So I think first, see if there's a connection to vaping, and then two, I would seek medical attention right away with your local physician to have a better understanding of whether it's connected to this or something else. But it also will help our state agencies and our national agencies get a better handle of the situation.
Thank you so much for answering all of the questions today. And if you have more questions about vaping or the use of e-cigarette products, please leave your questions in the comments below this video, and we will do our best to get back to you as soon as possible.